In a forest, a knight's helmet rests on the leaf-strewn ground near a bloody corpse. A warrior, his body also covered in blood, rises while wearing the helmet. The scene is revealed to be a dream as Anne's eyes snap open inside a church, where a priest delivers a sermon to a congregation made up only of women. After the service, Anne's mother-in-law, Morwen, speaks to a pregnant woman outside, placing a hand on her belly and wishing for the safe return of their husbands from war. As they walk home, Morwen holds a gold bracelet she has stolen from the woman. Anne asks if she will miss it, but Morwen replies that the woman has plenty while they have nothing. While crossing a field, Anne is startled by a noise and turns to see a lone knight on a white horse in the distance. When they arrive at their small, thatched roof hut, Anne plants seeds in a small garden patch. Later, she notices a spot of blood on her undergarment and secretly washes it out in a barrel of water. Inside their dimly lit home, Anne prepares a simple stew over the fire. Morwen attempts to eat but struggles to chew due to her bad teeth. So Anne takes her bowl, chews the food for her, and spits it back into the bowl for the older woman. After dinner, Morwen goes to bed. Still hungry, Anne scrapes the remaining stew from the cooking pot with her fingers and drinks the broth before joining Morwen. That night, Anne dreams of a young blonde girl playing with two boys in sunlit woods. The dream shifts to the girl running alone, then standing on a beach. The next morning, Anne is working in her garden as Morwen emerges with a basket. Morwen shows Anne the stolen gold bracelet and a small bloody cloth, telling her she will sell them at the market so they can have bread. After Morwen leaves, time passes. Anne has another, more disturbing dream. In a green-hued vision, she sees her husband, Seamus, running toward her through a field, but he suddenly collapses to his knees, screaming in agony while clutching his head. Anne wakes with a gasp to find Morwen has returned. Morwen shows her the food she bought, and Anne laughs when she finds a doll made from a turnip. Her happiness fades when she cuts into an onion and discovers it is completely rotten inside. Morwen angrily throws the onion against the hut wall, but then her expression softens. She sits and comforts the distraught Anne, stroking her hair and telling her to have faith, because the Virgin will provide. Sometime later, Anne walks along a path carrying a large jug. Hearing a man singing, she runs down to the beach, where she sees a fisherman with his small boat. She calls out to him, and he turns, revealing himself as her childhood friend, Iago. After a brief greeting, Anne asks if the wars are over. Iago, who has been pulling his boat and nets ashore, says the war is only over for him. When Anne then asks where her husband is, Iago's smile fades and he looks away sadly. Later, inside their dark hut, Iago eats from a bowl by the fire as the two women watch. Morwen directly asks where her son is. Iago explains that he and Seamus, both just fishermen and not soldiers, tried to escape the carnage one night. However, they were ambushed by thieves who beat them, stole their few belongings, and killed Seamus. When Morwen insists on knowing exactly how it happened, Iago reluctantly tells them the thieves split him from his neck to his navel. As Anne breaks down, crying silently with a look of agony, Iago places a comforting hand on hers and apologizes for her loss. Afterward, Anne goes into the woods and cries, clutching her chest in grief. She has a vision of her younger self standing with two boys, and in the memory, she reaches out and takes the hand of the one who was Seamus. In a separate, misty forest, a knight in full black armor sits silently on a white horse. Later that night, a boat is wrecked on the shore, and a lone survivor crawls onto the beach, seeing the bodies of his crewmates scattered nearby. Morwen appears and calls out that it is safe, but when the man is distracted, she stabs him in the back. She and Anne then loot the bodies for coins and valuables. While Anne prays over one of the dead men, Morwen calls them wicked pirates and says God smashed them against the rocks for their benefit. Back in their hut, the two women eat a stew by the fire. The next morning, as Anne tends her small garden, she sees the same knight on his horse watching from a distance. She runs inside in fear and tells Morwen, who looks out the window but sees nothing, dismissing Anne's worries by saying she's imagining things. On her way to church, Anne, wearing a purple hooded cloak, is followed by Iago. He offers to walk with her for safety, but she says she shouldn't walk with a man who is not her husband. Iago coldly reminds her that her husband is dead. When they arrive back at the hut, Morwen gives Iago a hostile look, takes Anne inside, and shuts the door on him. Inside, while Anne prepares food by the fire, Morwen brushes her long hair and complains about Iago, calling him jealous and greedy. Anne tries to defend him, explaining they were once close friends, but Morwen grabs her by the shoulders. She warns Anne that demons walk the earth in the shape of men, and that she must stay with Morwen to be safe. She threatens that if Anne disobeys, the knights of hell will drag her into a pit. A frightened Anne promises to obey as a dark knight is shown riding a white horse through a misty field. One afternoon, Anne returns to their hut to find a friar named Penross sitting with Morwen. After Morwen serves him a small piece of their last bread, the friar thanks them by showing them his holy relics. He presents Anne with a small ornate box containing a single white feather, which he claims is from the Bethlehem dove. He then asks for 3 silver pieces in return, but Morwen states they have no money. As the friar prepares to leave, Morwen confirms that no one knows of his return. While he recites a final blessing for the women, Morwen quietly approaches him from behind and slits his throat. Anne screams in horror as he falls to the floor, gurgling in his own blood. Crying that he was a holy man, Anne is told by a cold Morwen that he was a false pretender and that his belongings will feed them through the winter. The 2 women then drag his wrapped body into the woods and dump it into a stream, after which Morwen returns to the hut to scrub the blood from the floor. That night, in their dark, candlelit hut, Anne massages Morwen's shoulders while talking about the priest they killed. She calls him a philanderer, obsessed with wealth and young girls. Morwen, looking distressed, questions if they did the right thing, but Anne assures her that their survival is all that matters. Later, Morwen leaves the house wearing a dark cloak and walks into a misty forest. She looks around nervously before spotting a hooded figure who stands up from the tall grass and walks away. Suddenly, a knight in dark armor appears on a white horse in the fog. Terrified, Morwen screams and runs away down a path, tripping and falling to the ground. A bearded man, Iago, runs up to her. Morwen frantically explains she saw a demon in a suit of armor riding a white horse. Iago dismisses her fear, saying no one is there and that it was likely just a soldier. He seems pleased that she came to him for help. Morwen, still scared, says she doesn't want to be cursed and dragged into the pit of hell. Iago scoffs, blaming Anne's stories for her fear, and tells her that real hell is the war between rich men, not a demon in the woods. Iago tells Anne that he wants her and asks her to meet him that night at the place where they used to play as children. While walking through a field, Anne has a disturbing vision of Morwen dressed in red, sitting on a throne of branches and eating raw meat from a bowl. The vision ends with Morwen's eyes turning black as she screams, and Anne jolts awake in her bed, realizing it was a nightmare. Seeing Morwen asleep beside her, Anne quietly gets dressed in the dark and sneaks out of their small home. She walks along a dark, foggy path where she hears a horse neighing. When she reaches a clearing, she finds Iago waiting by a small fire. Although she tells him she shouldn't be there, they embrace and kiss passionately. The next morning, in a dreamlike sequence, they lie together by a stone well. Iago, now shirtless, asks her to come live with him, but Anne refuses, explaining that Morwen needs her. He warns that Morwen will drain the life out of her. Anne then returns home and gets back into bed, only for Morwen to open her eyes and ask where she has been. Anne claims she just went out for some fresh air. Morwen then begins to manipulate her, calling her an angel and saying she would die without her. She tells Anne she doesn't want to be alone and pulls her into a hug as Anne drifts back to sleep. Later, on a foggy, green-lit night, a traveler leading a horse and cart is forced to stop when he finds Anne standing in his path. While he is distracted, Morwen attacks him from behind. Morwen orders a horrified Anne to search the dead man's pockets for valuables. As Morwen rummages through the cart, Anne finds a small, carved wooden horse, which Morwen dismisses as a worthless toy. In a sunlit forest, a wounded knight with a bloody, bandaged hand cleans his sword and puts on his helmet. Later, during a church service, Anne sits with Morwen, holding the small wooden horse she found. A woman in front of them holds a baby, who begins to fuss and cry, forcing the mother to leave the church. After the service, Anne and Morwen walk along a path and meet the woman and her child. Morwen smiles and gives the baby a hug, and Anne offers the wooden horse to the child as a gift. Back at their small hut, Iago arrives and knocks on the door. Morwen answers and blocks his path, telling him to leave. He argues that he is there for Anne, who deserves a life and children of her own. Morwen angrily rejects this, saying children only brought her sorrow. He relents and walks away, shouting that he will wait for Anne. Morwen goes back inside and finds Anne crying by the fire, then comforts her, telling her this is their fate according to God's law. In the church, Anne kneels in a beam of light from a stained glass window and prays to the Virgin Mary, confessing that her heart is torn and she is hungry for a life she cannot have. Later, she prepares a sleeping draught by grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. After Morwen drinks the tea and falls into a deep sleep, Anne undoes her braided hair in front of a small mirror. She slips out of the hut, meeting Iago on a beach at sunset. He tells her a story, and they playfully chase each other before kissing in the woods. Back in the hut, Morwen wakes to find Anne gone. She grabs a cloak and goes outside, where she hears an approaching horse. Hiding behind a fence with a knife, she watches a knight in black armor arrive. Morwen notices a pouch on his belt with a white flower painted on it. The knight touches the hut's door, but leaves without entering. Morwen follows him into the misty woods and sees him fall from his horse. The knight stumbles through the misty woods and collapses to his knees, groaning in pain. Morwen rushes from the trees and stabs him in the back with her knife. He falls and tries to crawl away, tumbling down a muddy slope. Morwen follows, gets on top of the knight, and begins to choke him. As he struggles, she grabs a thick branch and presses it against his throat until he is dead. She then takes the coin pouch from his belt. Hearing strange whispers, she turns her attention to the knight's helmet and pulls it off. The next morning, as Anne and Iago lie together, he asks her what she is thinking about. She admits to having sinful thoughts after hearing a sermon about the demon of greed, Mammon. Anne confesses that she felt a terrifying greed while looking at a woman with a happy life, a newborn baby, and wealth. When Iago suggests she deserves those things too, she playfully calls him a demon, and they share a passionate kiss. Later, Anne finds Morwen in her dark, candlelit hut and tells her she has decided to leave and become Iago's wife. Morwen sits silently with her back turned until Anne says that Seamus is gone. Enraged, Morwen jumps up, slaps Anne across the face, and screams insults at her. She warns Anne that by abandoning her, the knights of hell will come for her and drag her down. After shoving Anne to the floor, Morwen watches as she flees in terror. Anne runs through a field and into Iago's arms, vowing that she will no longer be under Morwen's control. In the middle of the night, Anne wakes up with a gasp, startled by a nightmare. In her dream, she saw a dark, armored knight emerge from the shadows of a stone ruin and lunge at her with a sword. The next morning, Anne, wrapped in a blanket, finds Iago outside and convinces him to attend church. He smiles and kisses her. During the sermon inside the dimly lit church, Iago sits with a bored expression and yawns. When the service ends, he waits impatiently as Anne stays behind to pray, kneeling before a window where several candles are lit. He tells her the sun is down and they should leave. Anne insists on saying a prayer for Morwen and Seamus. Iago becomes angry, snapping that Rotherham's men killed Seamus and that he doesn't want to hear about it anymore. Anne immediately points out his contradictory story, reminding him that he'd previously blamed thieves. Iago insists the details are irrelevant, but Anne threatens to never speak to him again unless he tells her the whole truth. Finally, he confesses, explaining that his wartime comrade, Rotherham, had been consumed by greed. A flashback reveals Iago and Rotherham in a green, misty forest after a battle. When they find a surviving soldier screaming in pain, Rotherham coldly kills him. Iago begins to loot the dead, but Rotherham snatches a coin purse from his hands. Later, the mysterious knight they'd seen on horseback attacks their camp. A shirtless Rotherham fights the knight with savage intensity, eventually overpowering and stabbing him multiple times. Ignoring Iago's desperate pleas, Rotherham rips the helmet from the dead knight and places it on his own head. He roars and raises his arms in triumph, but then screams in agony, clutching his head as he struggles to remove the helmet. As Rotherham begs for help, a terrified Iago turns and flees into the woods. He runs as a ghostly hand reaches up from the ground, leaving Rotherham to his fate. In her candle-lit hut, Morwen stares at the dark helmet she brought home. A flashback reveals the horrific truth. When she killed the knight, it was her son, Seamus, his face completely burned and disfigured. The realization causes her to fall to her knees in a misty field, crying out in agony. Back at the church, Iago finishes his confession, and Anne coldly accuses him of abandoning Seamus, admitting Morwen was right to call him a jealous boy. Iago can only watch as Anne stands and walks out, leaving him alone in the pew. Outside in the dark, she walks through a graveyard and discovers the priest's body slumped against a stone wall, his throat gruesomely slit. Terrified, she flees through the woods to Morwen's hut. After finding the home empty, she is suddenly grabbed from behind by the knight. Anne screams, but the knight's voice is Morwen's, pleading for help and crying that she can't get the burning helmet off. Anne asks if the helmeted figure is trying to scare her, but Morwen, trapped inside, cries that the helmet is burning her and begs for help. Anne rushes to her and tries to pull the helmet off, but he will not budge. Anne runs into a nearby hut, grabs a wooden mallet, and smashes the helmet, which breaks apart. Morwen collapses in relief, her face revealed to be horribly scarred from the burns. As Anne helps her to her feet, Morwen apologizes and asks for forgiveness. Behind them, the broken pieces of the helmet glow and reassemble, releasing a cloud of dark, screaming souls. Terrified, Anne runs back to her own hut and barricades the door with a bench. After a loud pounding on the door ceases, Anne cautiously opens it to find the helmet lying on the ground, whispering to her. As Morwen warns her that the helmet is cursed, Anne picks it up, declaring that it has no power over her. Morwen stares in awe as a faint halo of light glows around Anne's head. The next morning, Iago finds Anne on the beach and tells her he wants her. She touches his face, then firmly rejects him, stating that she doesn't belong to anyone. After he accuses her of being the one haunted by demons, she slaps him and walks away while he screams insults. Later, Anne prepares an herbal drink for the frail Morwen, showing she is now in charge. She then goes into the woods, uncovers a hidden wooden box, and lifts the helmet out, holding it thoughtfully. Thanks for watching.